In this week's Bizline, Vietnam UK signed 26 cooperation deals. And later on, Vietnam promotes green growth in post-pandemic economic recovery. Hello there, you're tuning into Bizline, our weekly economic journal on VTV International. I'm Hoàng Hằng, and as usual, we now take a look at news making headlines in Vietnam's economic scene this week.
Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh attended and witnessed a ceremony to sign 26 cooperation agreements between ministries, sectors and businesses of Vietnam and the United Kingdom on October the 31st, London time. The 26 agreements included a letter of intent to join the lowering emissions by accelerating forest finance coalition, an agreement on cooperation to develop an action plan to strengthen linkages between the two countries' higher education institutions, and a cooperation agreement to develop human resources training programs for the Ministry of Planning and Investment and support Vietnamese startups. Notably, Vietjet Air and Rolls-Royce Group signed an agreement to provide engines and engine services for the airline's wide-body fleet with a total value of $400 million, while Sovico and HD Bank also made deals worth hundreds of millions of US dollars with United Kingdom partners.
Vietnam has remained an attractive destination for foreign investors amid the pandemic. According to data from the Ministry of Planning and Investment, in the first 10 months of the year, Vietnam received over $23.7 billion in foreign direct investment, up 1.1% over the same period last year. This capital flow came mainly from Singapore, South Korea, and Japan. Many large-scale projects have been urgently dispersed, while localities have issued flexible solutions to ensure both pandemic prevention and investment attraction.
According to the General Statistics Office, in 10 months, Vietnam's export turnover is estimated to have reached more than $267 billion, up nearly 17% over the same period last year. Overall, Vietnam had 31 export products, reaching a turnover of over $1 billion. The US continues to be Vietnam's largest export market. In addition, import turnover in October reached $26 billion, down 1.7% compared to the previous month. China is Vietnam's largest import market.
Over the past month, the number of businesses restarting operations has increased by nearly 30%. According to the report of the General Statistics Office, in October, more than 4,300 businesses resumed operations. In addition, the number of newly established enterprises also increased. In the past month, Vietnam recorded more than 8,200 newly established enterprises with registered capital of more than $4.7 billion, an increase of over 73% compared to the previous month.
The Cát Linh Hà Đông Metro Line project will be inaugurated and put into commercial operation before November the 10th, according to the Ministry of Transport. The quality assessment results of the metro line were approved by the State Council for acceptance of construction projects on November the 29th. This was the first step in the project before beginning commercial operation. The line, which runs from Cát Linh in Ba Đình district to Hà Đông district, will be the first urban railway put into operation in the country. Hanoi will offer free travel for all passengers during the first 15 days after the line is put into operation.
The government has approved the agenda to welcome foreign tourists to the country on a pilot basis, as proposed by the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism. The pilot program involves 3 phases. The first phase will start from November this year and will welcome tourists using combo packages and allow them to visit selected destinations. The second phase will start from January 2022 and will welcome more arrivals. After completing a 7-day tour of a destination, tourists can then visit other destinations. In the third phase, which will start from the second quarter of next year, The full reopening of the industry will be decided based on accommodation capacity and pandemic prevention results.
Those are some highlights in Vietnam's economic scene. Up next in our crosstalk, we will take a look at Vietnam's development towards a green economy and Vietnam's commitments recently announced by Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh at the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference of the Parties, or COP26, this week. In his speech at the climate summit held within the framework of the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference of the Parties, or COP26, Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh affirmed that Vietnam will build and implement strong measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions under the Paris Agreements to achieve zero emissions by 2050. As one of the countries most affected by climate change, Vietnam is making efforts to develop the economy, ensure people's lives, and contribute to the global community, in which green growth has been determined a key factor for Vietnam to overcome difficulties caused by the pandemic and shifts towards sustainable development. Join us in this week's Bizline as we discuss Vietnam's development towards a green economy. But first, let's have a look at the main points of the National Green Growth Strategy 2021 to 2030, recently approved by the government in the following clip.
Vietnam will build and implement strong measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by using its own resources, coupled with the cooperation and support of the international community to achieve zero emissions by 2050. This was affirmed by Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh at his speech at the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference of the Parties, or COP26, which was recently held in Glasgow, UK. In addition, Vietnam also joined nearly 90 countries in signing the pledge to reduce global methane emissions. Accordingly, Vietnam aims to reduce the potent greenhouse gas methane by 30% by the year 2030. Such strong commitments further highlight Vietnam's drastic actions in the fight against climate change in recent years. Before the Prime Minister's attendance at COP26, in early October, the government officially approved the National Green Growth Strategy for 2021 to 2030 with a vision to 2050, aiming to reduce the rate of greenhouse gas emissions over GDP and to green the country's economic sectors. This strategy will play an important role in promoting the restructuring of the economy in association with renovating the growth model. It will also encourage sustainable development and contribute to post-pandemic economic recovery towards a green economy.
It is our pleasure today to have a discussion with His Excellency Mr. Gareth Worth, British Ambassador to Vietnam, and via video conferencing, Mr. Mark Forney, Lead Disaster Management Specialist with the World Bank. Well, thank you to both of our guests for joining us.
I'm very pleased to be here.
Now, first of all, before the Prime Minister attended COP26 in early October, the government approved the National Green Growth Strategy 2021 to 2030. The focus is to develop a green economy while lowering carbon emission with a vision toward carbon neutrality. So what do you think about this strategy?
So I've been in Vietnam for 3 years now, and I think it's fair to say when I arrived here, the discussion was about growth first and then green second. And now I can see a significant change in government policymakers and in business because they are realizing that the two must go hand in hand. And the new green growth strategy, also the commitment to carbon neutrality net zero in 2050 that you mentioned, these are both big signals to government and the market about a new type of growth.
Well, first, I think it's really important to have a vision and a direction to point towards for action to take place in coming years, and to set out a framework that can enable modules of implementation to fit within is important. And the breadth of the types of actions and activities that are envisioned in the plan do a good job in not just focusing on one area or another area, but trying to think of this from a whole of government type of response.
Mr. Mark Forney, the National Green Growth Strategy 2021 to 2030 aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, make economic sectors greener, promote sustainable consumption, and promote the green transition. So what do you think about these goals?
Manufacturing of the green economy is where a lot of national governments and national economic policy is moving towards. And it's fundamental for the government to think about the job creation opportunities that such a strategy are going to put forth. And it's not creating jobs for the sake of employment, but it's creating jobs to be competitive in the new economy, the green economy, the economy that's going to cost less to operate and that's going to become more efficient. And this is, the implementation of such a strategy that saves money, creates medium-term fiscal space to allow additional infrastructure investment, and that sets up a platform for incentivizing the jobs of the future to come and be generated in Vietnam for the implementation of those activities is really the right way to go.
Some say that developed countries have undergone a long process of industrialization, and people believe that these countries should reduce the industrial park in their economies to make way for developing countries. So do you think this is a valid point?
So I very much agree that developed countries have a historical responsibility because they've been producing carbon dioxide for many decades now, including the UK. But it's not a question of stop manufacturing here so you can start manufacturing there. It's a question of making sure that the footprint of all our activity, industrial or services, reduces the carbon footprint. So that in Vietnam, for instance, when you're producing clothes and footwear for the market in Europe and the US, the consumers want the footprint of those clothes and footwear to be zero. They want renewable electricity to run the factories. They want recycled materials, and they want clean business models. So that's where we come together. The interests of our investors and your producers come together and are aligned.
Since the Paris Agreement was adopted by participating countries at the 2015 United Nations Climate Change Conference of the Parties, or COP21, Vietnam has been constantly making efforts to reduce emissions. During 2015 to 2019, the country reduced emissions by 17 times more than in previous years. It aims to reduce 40 times further by 2030 with its own resources, which is equivalent to a reduction of 83.9 million tons of carbon dioxide, reaching up to 250.8 million tons with international support.
COP26 lần này sẽ rất là quan trọng đối với các nước đang phát triển như Việt Nam, bởi vì Việt Nam là một trong những quốc gia chịu nhiều ảnh hưởng của tác động của biến đổi khí hậu. Chính vì vậy mà các hoạt động liên quan đến thích ứng với biến đổi khí hậu là một trong những hoạt động được ưu tiên của Việt Nam hiện nay.
In recent years, Vietnam has promulgated many policies and mechanisms aiming to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to climate change. These include Party Central Committee resolutions, government decrees, relevant legislation, national target programs, and action plans towards sustainable development.
Nỗ lực của Việt Nam giảm nhẹ phát thải khí nhà kính sẽ có đóng góp rất lớn cho cái nỗ lực chung của toàn cầu về giảm phát thải khí nhà kính. Nhiều nước có cái vị trí, có cái điều kiện phát triển tương đương Việt Nam hoặc thấp hơn sẽ nhìn Việt Nam để mà hành động.
Despite economic limitations, Vietnam has still been fulfilling its international duties by joining hands with the global community to offset climate change. In addition, the country has also been praised at international forums as a pioneer in realizing its commitments in the fight against climate change.
Why is green growth a good approach for the economy to recover from COVID-19?
So the sorts of jobs that we need coming out of the pandemic are jobs in high-tech industries, high-tech products, jobs in green infrastructure, so that we're building the new cities of Vietnam in a new way with public transport, with good water systems, with smart city management so that floods and heat cannot damage those cities. The opportunities are huge, and I'm very excited because I've seen that this is already starting in Vietnam, and the potential to return to a good high growth level, but not in the same way as previously, this time with a much closer focus on reducing the amount of energy required for every unit of GDP. It's such a big, exciting opportunity.
Actually, if we take a step back and think of the pandemic and how events have transpired over the last 2 years, there's a lesson here. The lesson is that the world, the global population, governments around the world, they didn't know how quickly this problem was going to be solved. But they can, and they did, put together an enabling framework to incentivize the development and deployment of vaccines. And the governments had a specific role. Economic recovery can be made more effective and efficient by thinking of a green recovery.
Now, recently, 14 more wind power projects were approved for commercial operations. How do you evaluate the potential of renewable and clean energy development in Vietnam?
Let me start with the example of the UK, and it was not that long ago that the UK was heavily dependent on coal. 10 years ago, we were still using coal to provide a significant proportion of our electricity. This year, that proportion is down to 2%, and we expect to have zero coal in our electricity within the next couple of years. And how did we do that? We brought in a new resource, which was offshore wind. Vietnam has some similarities geographically. You have a long coastline, you have a good wind resource, and you have got a huge opportunity, and this has started already with solar. The solar expansion in Vietnam in the last couple of years has been very impressive, and it's now moving into the wind sector. I have no doubt that this will be the big story of energy in Vietnam in the next 10 years. It will be the emergence of offshore wind.
Localities from the northern region to Thừa Thiên Huế province receive 1,800 to 2,100 hours of sunshine annually. Southern provinces and cities from Da Nang to Cà Mau, meanwhile, have 2,000 to 2,600 hours. These are ideal conditions for the development of solar power plants.
Năm 2020 có hai cái dấu mốc quan trọng đối với phát triển điện mặt trời ở Việt Nam. Đứng thứ 8 trên thế giới về tổng mức đầu tư vào điện mặt trời, đứng thứ 5 trên thế giới về tổng công suất lắp đặt.
Chúng ta nằm trong cái khu vực mà có cái tiềm năng năng lượng gió thuộc vào loại rất tốt ở khu vực Đông Nam Á. Dự báo trong vòng khoảng 10 năm nữa có khả năng lại bùng nổ như điện mặt trời trong thời gian vừa qua.
With the potential to provide an inexhaustible, renewable, and mineable energy source, even in the most remote places, renewable energy can reduce global warming. Renewable energy contributes to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 33% of the reduction target of the energy sector in Vietnam.
Tỷ lệ của phát thải năng lượng trong năng lượng từ 60% năm 2014 thì tăng dần lên đến 73% vào 2030. Như vậy, giảm phát thải khí nhà kính trong lĩnh vực năng lượng có thể nói là đóng góp rất lớn cho cái tổng giảm phát thải khí nhà kính của quốc gia.
According to the draft National Power Development Plan 2021 to 2030, Power Plan 8, the proportion of electricity produced by solar power and wind power in Vietnam will be 11% in 2030 and more than 27% in 2045, respectively. This is a great effort by Vietnam to contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and join hands with other nations to eventually bring greenhouse gas emissions to zero.
Mr. Ambassador, the National Green Growth Strategy emphasizes international cooperation, showing Vietnam's commitment to global integration and also the adaptation to the new situation post-COVID-19. So what do you think about the cooperation projects between Vietnam and the UK in the near future to promote a green transition?
Some of our activity and our support from the UK and from the international community must focus on helping those communities that are most vulnerable. Even more important is reducing emissions, and we've talked already today about energy, the role of energy in that. So a lot of attention will be on supporting Vietnam to transition away from coal towards wind. There's no need for Vietnam to invest in new coal-fired power stations when there are alternative solutions that are greener. And there is another positive thing to mention. We can be saved if we invest in biodiversity and forests. And we know the forests are the lungs of the world. We know that Vietnam is one of the most important biodiversity hubs in the world. So protecting forests in Vietnam, making sure that businesses overseas who want to offset their carbon emissions and want to pay their carbon taxes do so by funding forestry projects in Vietnam. So this is a complex approach that will include adaptation, emissions reduction and nature-based solutions.
Besides renewable energy, digital transformation is the future of a sustainable economy. The Vietnamese government considers it a breakthrough in the economic restructuring plan. So how will digital transformation affect the speed and also the process of restoring production and business activities in the new situation?
So Industry 4.0 and the digital transformation in Vietnam have been a priority for the government for many years. In some ways, I want to say that green is the new digital. This means if you want to drive up productivity in Vietnamese industry and business, we have to use sustainable approaches and we have to match them with digital approaches. That is the future, so we can minimize wastage. Because a lot of the energy and a lot of the consumption we do is unnecessary.
Thanks to an investment of over $21 million into line automation and digital transformation, each day, this unit produces 25,000 meters of panels, but the number of workers needed is only 5 to 7 people.
Chuyển đổi số để tất cả đưa vào quy trình tác nghiệp online và các cái dữ liệu của chúng tôi đều được xử lý một cách hợp lý.
In the economic restructuring plan for the period 2021 to 2025, the digital economy will account for 20% of GDP. The digital economy of each industry will reach at least 10%, and 100% of enterprises will be aware of and recognize the importance of digital transformation.
Chuyển đổi số mới giúp cho doanh nghiệp có sức đề kháng tốt hơn trước dịch bệnh. Các doanh nghiệp cũng phải tính đến tái cấu trúc lại lao động.
Digital transformation has become a development trend in the global economy. This will change traditional methods from a direct approach to a public online environment, which will help reduce costs.
Thí dụ thì cái mobile money chẳng hạn để cho thanh toán số đấy. Hiện nay là chỉ thí điểm thôi nhưng mà chúng ta đã mất 3 năm hiện nay cũng vẫn chưa có phép được.
Chúng ta phải xây dựng càng nhanh càng tốt những cái cơ sở pháp lý ở dưới dạng luật hoặc là những cái nghị định. Về phía Bộ Kế hoạch Đầu tư cũng như một số cơ quan liên quan cũng đã nghiên cứu, đó là cái sự thử nghiệm chính sách sandbox để chúng ta thực hiện các cái nội dung liên quan tới chuyển đổi số một cách có hiệu quả nhất.
The pandemic has greatly impacted the economy, but it has also accelerated the process of digital transformation. As such, a number of economic operations and transactions have been adapted for digital transformation, and the government has developed a national strategy on digital transformation. Ministries and sectors have also integrated the data into national data, and localities have developed smart city projects, which are all favorable factors for the digital transformation of Vietnam.
What actions do you suggest the Vietnamese government take in terms of developing institutions and policies or allocating state resources for green growth in the future?
So I think that the Vietnamese government has taken a very important step in this last week with the announcements that Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh made at COP26. First of all, the headline announcement of the net zero 2050 target, but also Vietnam has signed up to a number of other really important initiatives, to a forestry reforestation initiative, to an initiative to cut methane emissions. And I think that's the next phase for Vietnam, is to make sure the roadmap is comprehensive, to make sure that all of the finance flows that I've been talking about earlier are coming into Vietnam, being used as much as possible, because it's a competitive environment. Vietnam has to compete for foreign direct investment, and also Vietnam needs to compete for the international climate finance to make sure that it gets its fair share.
Now, where does that incentive come from for the government to provide a carrot to private actors to increase the efficiency of their buildings, or for the government, the city or provincial government, to create an incentive to install rooftop solar in their buildings, or for that same city or provincial government to incentivize the upgrade of motorbikes to electric motorbikes? Subnational, the provincial or city government, to create an enabling environment through an incentive to connect private capital markets of climate finance with private actors in Vietnam to be able to make that transition happen to benefit everybody. So this is an example that we're working a lot towards, and that whole of government approach to provide financial incentives to the different actors, private and public, to make this interesting, is only possible because we are at this inflection point. We need to take action.
How will promoting green and sustainable growth enhance Vietnam's position in the fight against climate change, and how will it boost Vietnam's role in the global supply chain?
So we know that Vietnam has been successful, extremely successful, in the last couple of decades by integrating into global trade and global supply chains. And Vietnam has a trade to GDP ratio of 200%. So Vietnam trades twice as much as its own GDP. This is a very impressive indicator of how connected Vietnam is. If Vietnam can make sure that the new offer that it's making to international investors stays as attractive as the offer has been in this last 20 years, then I am extremely positive about the potential.
We think that with where Vietnam stands in their ambition and in the progress that they've been making, actually to be able to trade these offsets, they're at and the size of the cities, the size of the country, they are in an advantageous position to lead, to show by example that not only are we taking action at the national government, but we're taking action with the provinces and with the cities in a coordinated way by creating demand, domestic demand for solar panels, for batteries, for windmills, for e-mobility, e-vehicles. By creating that demand domestically, manufacturing comes up domestically. So it's also trying to create the right government incentive structure to be able to incentivize in the right way these types of actions that will, most importantly, help Vietnam in the next 50 years towards Plan 2045 to be that high-income country, to be the manufacturer of the green economy.
Economic development, especially recovery from severe impacts of COVID-19 pandemic, poses great challenges for countries in moving toward improving the quality of life, meeting the needs of society and ensuring a sustainable environment. A green economy with low emission industrial parks, environmentally friendly energy sources, green belts and large-scale ecotourism areas to rebalance the ecosystem are common global trends. Therefore, the government's approval of the National Green Growth Strategy 2021 to 2030 strongly highlights Vietnam's determination to restructure the economy by innovating its growth model towards green growth. This is the foundation for the country to achieve important milestones in 2045 and beyond, thereby creating great opportunities for Vietnam to be a pioneer in the region in terms of green growth and green recovery, while keeping up with development trends of the world. And this also brings us to the end of our BizLine program. To rewatch our program, please log on to our official website at vtv4.vtv.vn or download our app VTV Go from App Store and Google Play for get a lot more. Goodbye for now, and thanks for tuning in.